Hello and good morning all. My name is George Kenny and I am a systems engineer, an enterprise systems engineer I should say, and I'll be your host for this webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is supercharge your storage, and more specifically how you achieve this with the Veeam Availability Suite and our strong, fruitful relationship with Dell EMC Storage. Now, if you know anything about Veeam as a company, it will be the fact that we deal very much with availability. So that's making sure that your data, services, applications, etc. are available 24/7, 365, irrespective of the neighboring consequences that might prevail. However, we are a software-only company. So much of what we'll be talking about today is how we engage with Dell EMC on the storage aspect and how we manage to maintain that high level of availability and uptime to our customers, but in an efficient and appropriate way from those particular storage platforms. So just some basic housekeeping before the webinar. There is a questions widget in the webinar interface. Please do ask any questions you may have. These sessions are designed to be interactive and here to ensure you guys and girls get something valuable out of the event. So as a systems engineer, first and foremost, I will be able to review, or I should be able to review those questions towards the end of the webinar during a wee Q&A session we'll have. So don't feel afraid to put them on there. I'll read them out and we can go through them line by line and make sure that we've covered off, unturned all the stones, crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. Also, I'd just like to conduct a quick audio check. So there is a raise hand icon in your webinar. If you're connected and listening to me, then if you wouldn't mind simply pressing the raise hand icon, it's a very small gold icon you'll see on the left-hand side, simply to confirm you're all hearing me loud and clear. Okay, so good number of raised hands, that's great. And great attendance on the webinar today. These sessions are arranged by our online events team who do a cracking job, so they'll be pleased we have such a high attendance to start off with. Let's just hope I can keep you all captive and enthused during the next 50 odd minutes. So before we start, just to say there is a wealth of benefits from a marriage between Dell EMC Storage and the Veeam Availability Platform. So much so, it'd be quite hard to cover off all of those particular aspects in such a quick webinar. So I'll be touching on some of the key deliverables, just giving you a glimpse into them during this session, giving you a high level understanding of some of that functionality, but I'll also be driving into the interface and showcase you the Veeam Management Console, do a quick demo as we go through it, and I'll chop and change between the presentation and the demonstration, and hopefully drive some of the unique integration benefits we have with Dell EMC. So just a bit of background before we start, just to cover off a little bit about Veeam and why this is relevant. So these blue blobs at the bottom, the clouds and the square boxes, represent the various ecosystems of various areas where our software has touch points. So I just want to talk to you about these very quickly to give an understanding from a very high level perspective. If we start off with the square box there, private cloud or on-prem, this is historically where we've come from. Okay, this is where end user customers have purchased our software, they've installed it into their infrastructure or into their data centers, and they use the Veeam Availability Suite or Veeam Availability Platform to protect their workloads, their applications, their data, okay? And that's where we've come from historically, and that's not going to go anywhere. That's still a really crucial and important part of our business. But as we've grown and we've embraced more cloud technologies, that's scaled out. So towards the left, we have managed cloud or private cloud. This is where some of our service providers sit. These are organizations, partners, resellers, managed service providers who essentially utilize the Veeam Availability Platform to drive backup as a service, DR as a service to their end user customers, maybe as a white labeled service. The end user customer would be blissfully unaware that Veeam is the driver in that relationship. It's just an enabler for those managed cloud providers to actually provide those services onwards to their community of users. And then public cloud. So these are things like Azure, AWS, all of those sorts of labels. We're not limited to any particular labels that we work with inside the public cloud. And the way I explain this is really that if you are a on-prem customer and you maybe want to extend your availability or your backup into public cloud, you might want to use public cloud as a target for where you store and save data backups to. Okay, so you utilize that because it's convenient and low cost or whatever it might be. Okay, but equally so, you might be running workloads in public cloud. You might have maybe a couple of virtual machines dotted in AWS, or maybe a smattering of applications that run with inside Azure, but you want to protect those because you don't want to rely just on the native recovery tools with inside those particular platforms. So you would use the Veeam Availability Platform to protect the workloads that live inside public cloud, and maybe you drive them out and bring them back onto on-prem or maybe into another cross-cloud provider. Okay, so in short, when it comes to public cloud, we can use public cloud as a target to send data into. We can also use it as a source to actually send data out of and scale it out into other cloud or other infrastructures. And then finally on the right hand side is SaaS. So SaaS is really important for us. We're seeing more of our customers adopting things like Workday, Salesforce, Microsoft Office 365. These are becoming far more popular within our end user community. So at Veeam, we have a particular roadmap to develop more application support for SaaS. Today, we have the ability to protect entities that live within inside Microsoft Office 365. So that would still provide that level of availability, data protection from those SaaS-based modules, and allow you to save that where you deem fit. Whether you want to put that on-prem into your own infrastructure, maybe you want to put it into a non-Microsoft cloud, so you've got that level of insurance to make sure you're protected should anything become compromised. And in the middle there, we've just got an idea of how we actually work with those independent systems. We've got physical servers. We're not limited just to virtual, but we also do support hypervisors, VMware, Hyper-V, Nutanix, AHV, so on and so forth. File, cloud native apps, and containers, all those different things that we can interact with and actually protect. So that's just a bit of background, hopefully gives you a high level glimpse of how Veeam operate and what our real mantras are. So in terms of trying to get to the crux of this today, I want to cover off really some of our licensing. And the reason for that is some of the integration we have with Dell EMC is limited within some of our licensing camps. So I'm just going to make sure that I don't pull the wool over anyone's eyes. Within our entry-level licensing camp with Veeam Backup and Replication, so it says there at the top, VBR, we have a standard edition, and that's why it's denoted by this can of Diet Veeam. It's sort of the entry point. It does backup, it does replication, and it does restores very, very efficiently and swiftly. But it is limited in some of the functionality. It has, has no ability to run something called a SureBackup, which is where we can boot up virtual machines en masse and run application tests against them. It is limited with the granularity of the applications that you can actually restore back into the live environment. Okay, so it is really the basic entry point. And equally so, we have the next version up, VBR Enterprise. You can see this by this sort of like executive seat we have on a plane, with a little water cooler next to it. But this does provide things like SureBackup, application level restores, some of the enterprise features you would expect from our particular camp. And just before I get to the integration with Dell EMC, what I want to do is clear up and demystify the difference between something that we call backups and something that we call storage snapshots. And that's denoted by this sort of like Dell EMC Unity storage array you can see here. Now, if I was explaining this to my mother-in-law, I would explain backups are essentially very similar to when you maybe install a USB pen drive into your laptop and you copy some data from your laptop onto that USB pen drive because maybe you want to move it somewhere, migrate it, copy it, back it up, whatever it may be. But it's slow, the progress bar comes up that green bar in Windows if you're a Windows sort of guy, and it takes a while to copy that data from your machine onto that USB drive, and then afterwards you can do with it as you wish. So it's moving data from A to B. It's copying and pasting data, okay? However, with storage snapshots, these are pretty unique, okay? These are actually point-in-time backups, if you will, but point-in-time recovery points that live within inside your storage architecture. They're proprietary, so they live within inside your Dell EMC array, and they're created on the fly, a complete copy of that storage volume or that folder of data repository, whatever terminology you want to use, instantly and with virtually zero impact or overhead on the applications that are running on it. The users are blissfully unaware that those storage snapshots are happening in the background. So they're fast, they're efficient, and they have a very high cost per gig because obviously you're using a very expensive array to store those particular storage snapshots on. So when it comes to Dell EMC storage and the Veeam Availability Suite, ideally what we want to do is we want to marry these two technologies, these two benefiting technologies together and really make the most of the unique features that they deliver. Now, I remember when I first started working earlier in my career as part of a storage infrastructure team, and the backup administrator would say to me, "Hey, you kid, you take storage snapshots at the SAN layer, right? Can I get the data out of your storage-based backups and put them into my backup repository or onto my backup tape library?" And the answer, sadly, would be no. It's a real head scratcher because I could see the benefits of actually being able to get the data out of the storage array and give them to him as a backup point, but it wasn't possible. They were within inside a proprietary framework. The SAN vendors didn't really want people taking out the valuable data that lived within inside those storage snapshots and moving them elsewhere because it meant that they could really sell more storage. And really, the reason why we keep SAN snapshot on a SAN as the most critical recovery point is a bad thing, typically because it denotes or it goes against something that we refer to as the 3-2-1 rule. Now, this isn't necessarily something that Veeam invented or designed. It's just an industry standard good practice, and it goes a bit like this. 3 different copies of your data, so that same bit of data 3 times over, on 2 different media types or media sets, okay? One of which, ideally, is offsite. So that keeps a very, very unique and a good practice for data management. But obviously, if you rely on those storage snapshots that live within inside your storage array, as you can imagine, that storage array is a physical box. It has multiple controllers, multiple drives, all that good stuff. But if it were to fail, you have essentially put all your eggs into one hulking great big basket. So as a complete example, let's look at one of the typical features you get with Veeam, something called Veeam SureBackup. Now, the name of that particular feature really is quite self-explanatory. It allows us to verify the data that lives within inside the backups, the applications, the level of data within inside it, and guarantee that the backups have been taken at a very unique level and they're healthy. However, when you boot up several workloads on demand from a conventional cheap and deep storage, they can be somewhat slow. It will add additional overhead to your backup infrastructure. And let's be honest, your backup infrastructure tends to be built on, let's say, not the fastest blend of disks and controllers, as all you want to do is send backup data and archive data into it on a slow and periodic basis. So where the benefit of using integration with Dell EMC comes into play is that we can achieve that very same goal, but drive this out of your primary storage, ultimately the Dell EMC array. So why would you want to do this? Well, ultimately, if you did that from your backup repository, it's going to be a slow and arduous process. But with doing that directly from the array itself, if we can tap into that from a software perspective, we can actually do things like SureBackup, spin up virtual machines, spin up applications, run testing against them, run sandboxing against them, all of that good stuff, actually without lifting a finger. It becomes very, very easy and organic to do that. Now, please note at the top, it denotes SureBackup feature. It is a part of the Veeam Enterprise Plus estate. Okay, so like I said a moment ago, we try to make things easy at Veeam. So when you select a particular pillar of features, you get all of those features within that particular product camp. So all of the features that I'll be walking you through moving forward here from this point onwards are Enterprise Plus features. And it really is the Enterprise Plus feature set within inside the Veeam Availability Suite from a licensing version that gives you all of the hooks, all of the integration with something like a Dell EMC array. And what you can see here with this image is that the Dell EMC array on the left has those storage snapshots live within inside it. They're retained within inside that storage architecture. But by utilizing some of the unique integration at Veeam, we can actually absorb those SAN snapshots out of the array and move them elsewhere in your environment. As I said a moment ago with the 3-2-1 rule, actually taking those storage snapshots out that we know are very efficient and shifting them to another data center, another geography, another tape library, whatever it may be. So I'm just going to walk you through some of the key benefits that we might see or might ascertain from doing so. From a security standpoint, when we spin up virtual machines in an isolated environment, let's use malware as an example. If we were to try to do this from a backup repository that's connected to your LAN environment, you spin up the backup environment, you restore the data, and then obviously the malware takes maybe a couple of hours, but it reactivates itself and pushes it into your environment. So if you're replicating between your Dell EMC arrays, you could also do this on your peer Dell EMC array. So in your secondary data center where it's isolated, completely segregated from your production environment. So you can spin up all of those security checks onto that Dell EMC array using the Veeam software and actually make sure you're not re-infiltrating malware back into your environment and also reducing the payload on your estate while you do it. Development, using clones from those Dell EMC snapshots from the actual storage array, using that Veeam driver. If you've got SQL devs or DevOps guys, they want to do stuff at 2 o'clock in the morning, running some particular code or patching or testing. That can be arduous, right? And do you really want them doing that in a production environment? Hell no. So what you would do is you'd spin that up off the storage architecture. You'd give them access to their particular application group. They don't need access to the storage. They don't need access to VMware or the hypervisors. They just do this through that Veeam interface that you delegate to them. So they've got the ability to run those devs. Something maybe as simple as a Windows patch that you would be doing with inside your environment, maybe an update that's been released. Why would you do that on the live estate? Why not spin up that, say, for example, that SQL cluster into an isolated sandbox, run those patches onto the particular cluster nodes, make sure it's healthy, and then obviously, good to go. And I know for myself, having done Windows updates in the earlier part of my career, they are normally very, very good, but I have been burnt maybe half a dozen times to a dozen times where a Windows update has not gone successfully, or a patch of some sort, I should say, not just a Windows update, but it's caused maybe a problem or a corruption with the particular application or the system that it's running on. So let's run that on that isolated testing environment. Really, really ideal estate or use case to utilize that. And bringing all of those together really does tick a box in the compliance area. As we can test backups, we can be far more diligent with our testing. We can, do that reporting, that validation. If you're limited or restrained by things like SOX or GDPR frameworks, then it might be mandated to you to have certain isolated environments to actually do these tests on, to make sure you have the ability to mitigate from a data impact assessment. So some of these things we can leverage with that Dell EMC storage portfolio and the Veeam software estate will allow you to tick several of those boxes. And just as a side note, it's not just the Dell front-end storage array that we have integration with. We also have integration with their back-end data domain family. So this is where you're storing data to as a target. Now, out of the box at Veeam, we normally have about a 2-to-1 compression ratio. So if you've got 100 gig particular workload, when we save that down to disk, it's going to be about 50 gig on disk. So it's about half. It's not great, but it's not bad. All right. However, with something like a Dell data domain, this box is designed for very high intense sequential a fashion of writing data, backup data into an orderly fashion, recognizing those duplicate blocks, compressing them and storing them maybe 20-to-1, 30-to-1. Those are the sorts of numbers that I see. So we have integration with both the front end family and the back end family on the Dell EMC front, and that gives you that ability to have source to target integration all throughout that Veeam software interface. Now, what I want to do is just cover off some of the maybe the more technical elements of this, and we're going to start launching up the demo lab in a moment and actually showcase to you some of the interface, how it works, how the engines work. And the first one I'm going to touch on is actually backup from storage snapshots. This goes back to what I said a moment ago about having that story I told you about me being a junior storage admin earlier in my career and the ability that I couldn't absorb the snapshots out of the arrays. Well, this is going to really answer that and why this is a benefit. Now, bear in mind, this looks a bit scary, this slide, but I'm going to walk you through exactly what's going on here. Now, on the left-hand side is something that we call a standard VM backup, a standard virtual machine backup. This is what happens in the normal world, out of the box, next, finish. And this typically works for a lot of customers, works perfectly fine. And what's happening is we send an instruction as Veeam into VMware, and it creates a snapshot. We can see that on that X-axis there. It says VM Snapshot, and there's a very thin grey line that you can see. And then what happens after that, for want of a better word, we copy and paste the backup data. That's that green, thick black box. That's the time it takes to copy the data from the source and place it onto the target. But what happens afterwards is VMware has to do something called a VMware Snapshot delete or a redo log. And this normally works fine, but if you've got a particularly sensitive application, maybe it's a heavy workload, maybe it's something that's running 24/7, so there actually isn't an ideal time in the day, a downtime for that application because it's running 24/7 to actually run a backup workload against it, okay? So you don't have that downtime, okay? And what happens is that snapshot delete process can stun or maybe cause a little bit of sensitivity around the applications. Maybe you get a very small momentary period of idleness on that application. And you can see there that's denoted by that red line across. The snapshot lifetime is quite long because we have to wait for the copy and paste process to finish to the target before we can close, or before VMware can close the snapshot off with. Now, with our integration with Dell EMC, it's slightly different. We still send an instruction to VMware to create a snapshot. That snapshot is alive for about 5 to 10 seconds because that's the process where we'll use VMware Tools or VSS to actually capture an application consistent copy of the data that lives within inside the applications. But what's important then, at that point, the VMware snapshot is actually deleted. We remove that snapshot. It's only in existence for a very small period of time. And the snapshot command is sent down into the storage architecture, into that Dell EMC storage array. And that gives us the ability to actually copy and paste, again, that green box, the backup data from the storage array. We can now absorb the data out of that proprietary framework, that native Dell EMC storage platform. And this is not something we're doing without Dell EMC's consent. You know, we've worked together to develop this integration so they allow us to be able to interface with their APIs. We're having that conversation at the storage layer level, and then we're gracefully taking that data out of storage architecture and moving it into whatever that backup repository is. Maybe that backup repository is a data domain, like I referenced earlier. Maybe it's a primitive storage library or tape library, but we can do that now from the storage snapshot level. So firstly, during this partnership, everything is going to be agentless. So it means that it's going to be super easy to support from the infrastructure teams. No hassle managing umpteen agents living inside the guest VMs. It's very clean. It also reduces the VMware APIs that are having to be active during backups. So if you're doing several backups per day on those sensitive and critical applications, then you'll want to minimize the load on those VMs. Of course, as you can be more aggressive with the backup schedule, it ultimately means you can have more backup points or even leverage the native snapshots on the Dell EMC itself as a recovery point, for example. But bear in mind, and I always remind my customers of this, having backup from storage snapshots does not necessarily, it normally is faster, but it doesn't necessarily mean it always will be faster. An example of that is I was doing some work for a customer in Ireland last year, and they had a Dell EMC array, and the back-end interfaces were 2 times 8 gig fiber channel. But their front-end interface into VMware was 4 times 10 gig. So we actually turned on a backup process, and we turned it on against a very small workload, just a couple of VMs, okay? And we ran it with the storage integration straight away. So we were telling that instruction to go down to the Dell EMC. The Dell EMC was creating a snapshot, and then we were absorbing that data from the Dell EMC through the 2 times 8 gig fiber channel ports. And then we ran it through the VMware interface, turning off the snapshot integration. And it was actually faster, okay? But that's not what the customer was buying into. He's not buying faster snapshots. What he's buying is a much more graceful payload on the hypervisor because he doesn't want to have that snapshot hanging over the application for the duration of the backup copy process. So even though it's slower end to end, doing the backup from the fiber channel through the back end. Obviously, the throughput of the actual connectors we were talking to was slower, there's less bandwidth. It actually didn't matter. It doesn't matter how long it takes the data to come out using snapshot integration. Like I say, it's normally faster, but you don't really care about the speed. What you care about is actually making sure that those applications are maintained in a standard and available servicing state. They're not being interrupted. The users are blissfully unaware that you're doing a hulking great big backup operation in the background in the middle of the day when they're all working. That's what this is all about. So next thing I want to talk to you about is something called the Veeam Explorers. And again, if you're used to Veeam as a company and you've not used some of our storage integration, you should be certainly aware of our Explorers. And it says exactly what it is in the tin. You know, it's an Explorer that allows you to navigate around maybe an application and actually inspect some of the individual granular items that live within inside those particular backups. But the important thing with our Explorers, when you're talking about storage integration with Dell EMC, is that we can use that same Explorer functionality at the storage layer. So it might be the fact you have a snapshot that lives within inside the Dell EMC array, but using the Veeam Explorer, you can actually utilize our wizard to go and take out that granular item and push it into the live database. Now again, why would you want to do this? If you are a storage admin, or if let's say you're a backup admin and you want to restore some data into your environment and you want to do it from the storage snapshot, it's not a quick process. You have to first of all log into the Dell EMC array if you've got the credentials. If you don't have the credentials, you need to go and have a conversation with the storage admin and tell him why you want to get access into it, or you want him to do a particular operation for you. Either you or him or her then need to log into that array. You need to find the storage volume. You need to find the snapshot, you need to clone it, present it back to the fiber channel, make sure it's zoned in the correct fashion, push it back into VMware, log into VMware if you have access to the right VMware cluster, then do a rescan of the HBAs, bring in the storage volume, resignature it, because obviously now you've got two volumes with the same name, so on and so forth, find the VM, add it to the inventory, connect the VM up, browse the data store, find the application. There's a load of steps to do. It takes probably 30 to 45 minutes if you're good and you actually know what you're doing, and a ton of risk. You know, you're adding HBAs, connectors, it's completely unnecessary. So the Veeam Explorer, the beauty of this is that the backup administrator that maybe, let's say, for example, he doesn't have access to the Dell storage, he's just going through the applications. He wants to restore a particular item. And that whole process is done in the background because we have that integration with the Dell EMC array. We've got that association. So we can actually dive into those particular storage snapshots and cherry pick an individual item from them and push it back into the live application on the fly. That's really, really valuable because it's super, super quick and low risk. And you know, it doesn't require umpteen members of teams to get involved. So this is one of the real key scenarios where the Veeam Explorers becomes extremely valuable when you have that backup from storage snapshot integration. And finally, this is just a cover off of some of the different applications that we support, some of the scenarios where you might be doing that sort of stuff, instant VM recovery, object database restore. You don't have to push these back directly into the live application. You could use that technology and say, I just want to take a copy of maybe the database and bring it down onto my desktop, or maybe the mailbox, okay? So just a load of use case scenarios there for you to think about. So time to get interactive. Let's show you that in the actual interface using the Veeam Explorer and how this all hooks up. I'm just going to whiz over to my demo lab, and I have a Dell EMC in here with Veeam installed. Again, I'm hoping that some of you will be familiar with the Veeam interface. If you're not, it's not a problem. I will try and make it quite straightforward here. We're not going to go too deep. It should be able to get around. So what I want to bring your attention to is the tab down here on the bottom here, bottom left, storage infrastructure. And you can see here, you've got this tab, storage infrastructure, all the different tasks you might be doing. And we've got in there, add storage. When I go to add storage, you've got the Dell EMC wizard here. And it says you can add an EMC VNX, the VNX2, VNXE, and the newer Unity range, and a list of the protocols supported. So we go into that and actually ask us, what do we actually want to connect up? Which family? And you can see this is all built into the Veeam interface. So it doesn't really matter. You're not having to do any sort of hard work or scripting to actually get this integration to work. It's all built into our GUI. Dell and VMware, Dell and VMware, in all fairness, and Veeam have all worked harmoniously to get this integration working. So we've done all the hard work in the back end to make this nice and easy for you. You choose the particular family you want, and then you'd nurse that wizard to find the particular settings that you need. So you can see my one over here. I've actually got my array connected up. It's a particular volume in there. If I go and look at the settings on that, we can actually go and have a bit of a poke around and see what's in here. This is the actual IP address for the controller. You need the appropriate access rights, because obviously you need to speak to the storage admin to ensure he's allowing you to connect. Once that's done, then you've got that connection hooked up into Veeam for all the during the restores and the backup operations. And then here you can see the protocols that you'd select. And actually, this is quite interesting. You can say, which volumes do you actually want to add in? Okay, so what I always advise my customers is, don't add all the volumes. Be selective about the volumes that actually contain data you care about. You could go add all; it wouldn't make a major problem by any means. But just there's no need hooking up access to volumes that you don't need. So choose the ones you want, add them into the wizard, and then that you've got those particular storage LUNs that are containing those snapshots added into your repository. So let's go and have a look at the explorers, which I was just telling you about a moment ago. If I show you the volume, this is actually the LUN that is on the Dell EMC array. And on that, we can see all of these point-in-time snapshots. So I'm going to right-click on one of these, and I'm going to say Open. Now, what that's going to do in the background is actually going to mount the actual storage snapshot from the Dell EMC. Remember, I told you that was about a 30 to 45-minute operation, and it's going to show me the data that's contained in it. You can see how quick that is. This is just giving me a glimpse of the data that's in there. But you can see now what I can actually do is I can right-click on that, and I can say Restore the entire VM, Restore guest files, or restore individual application items. So for example, this particular box might have an Exchange instance living in it. I can click on that, and it'll actually now connect up the HBAs from the back of the storage array through Veeam, and actually allow us to actually interface and see all of the data that's contained within inside that particular storage volume. So you can see how quick that is. I'm going to cancel that because there's no need to nurse all the way through that. Okay, but again, very easy. You add your modules in here, and then you have your storage arrays contained, and we're going to come back to that in just a moment. So let's move forward. That was the explorers and how we actually hook up. What I want to be talking about now is the on-demand sandbox for storage snapshots. Now, I mentioned this earlier. This is all about verifying the recoverability of those applications, but also giving maybe some of your dev guys, maybe some of the SQL guys, the people that want to interface with those applications on a regular basis from doing testing, gives them a sandbox environment to actually leverage from that Dell EMC array. Again, it's not a manual or arduous process, but it's all driven through that Veeam Availability platform. And you can see that here on the demo, running any tests or development work on your production environment. Let's say, for example, you have something like a primitive Windows update or patch needs to be deployed into your SQL estate, SQL farm. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily want to running that in the production environment. So you can leverage those storage snapshots from the array and actually spin that up to Veeam and actually allow those application teams to test those whatever it is they're doing on those particular servers, those applications, and make sure that they're healthy. And then once you finish with it, they close it off and that data goes away. So some of the terminology to be aware of is something that we call an application group or a virtual lab. And that's where we would contain individual VMs and applications together. Again, I use SQL as an example because if you were wanting to do a SureBackup or a virtual lab from a SQL farm, it's probably likely you might have more than one SQL database that need to speak to each other. Maybe you've got some front-end servers or maybe some web servers that the application needs to service through. Maybe that it needs some authentication, so you might add an Active Directory server in there just so they can access all the SIDs and all the various access rights for the databases to start. So you'd group them together in an application, and there's really no limit to the scale of how large that can grow. And then that would spin up in its own application group within inside Veeam, but again, bear in mind, it's actually just spinning up out of those storage snapshots from the Dell EMC. So virtually, and I say virtually, almost zero load on your environment when you're doing this, because the Dell EMC array is designed to deliver storage snapshots on demand, numerous overlapping sequences over and over again. So you're really just leveraging what the Dell EMC is actually good at and making it super easy with the Veeam Availability Platform. And you can see there, when we've done that, we test the OS is booted, we test the network adapters are healthy, we actually make sure the application is responding under the hood, and that you get a report into your inbox, or the compliance officer gets in something to say that particular sensitive application you've got, that really important financial platform, whatever it is that you guys do, has been tested and verified and patched, and it's all healthy. But actually, you know what? This was really automated. It happened at the end of the backup process, and you made your life really, really easy. And here you go, a small quote from a loyal customer is really leveraging that SureBackup technology, and not just a handful. They're running 8 to 10 environments at any given time. So this could be simultaneous, overlapping, in the middle of the day, let's say, for example, separate teams, whatever you like. But it really is entirely useful asset when you map that Veeam and Dell EMC together. So I want to show you the on-demand sandbox and where you configure those. Those are actually quite quick. Again, we use some of the terminology around that in terms of virtual labs and application groups. You can see these down here. These are my verification labs and my sandbox. These are different ones that I've created in the past. Okay, so I'm just going to launch that up and actually have a look at what is actually in here. And I tell you what will be better. I will show you the application groups first, because that will be far easier. So within inside the application group, what we look at in here is the virtual machines. I tell you what, I'll do an exchange one, because that actually will probably be a little bit more interesting for us. So we can see in here, still only 2 VMs, but that's no major drama. We can see the Exchange server is being booted up alongside a demo AD box. Now that's because those 2 servers, if we're doing some Exchange tests to make sure our Exchange server or our SQL server or whatever it may be is running healthy, we want to test those particular properties, those particular roles against that particular VM. So you might have a cluster of VMs living inside that, maybe 6, 10, 12, who knows. And then you do those individual tests to make sure that the mail server service is running, the web server service is running, the necessary ports that are dependent for the application to come online and actually go in and do its job are actually active when the backup is completed. So you know that now the backup's been packed away, you know it's healthy. You know that if you ever had to go back to that and spin it up, that at that point in time, that box was 100% working, and all the application services within inside it were healthy. Okay, and if you don't have predefined scripts for them, then you can add your own in. You can just add them in there, run whatever arguments you want to against those particular services to make sure that your particular application is healthy and responding the way you need it to. So that's an application. Excuse me. That's an application group. Let's go back into our excuse me. Let's go back into our presentation. And finally, the last thing I want to talk to you about, and this is a really cool one, snapshot orchestration. Okay, so there's a couple of things to cover off here. Let's assume, if you will, that you have 2 data centers. Okay, and you have Dell EMC storage at both of those data centers doing all that good stuff. And actually, you're not utilizing Veeam to do the replication traffic. You're actually utilizing the Dell EMC, because it's block level, it's efficient at sending that data over the 1 gig or 10 gig pipe that you've got with inside your infrastructure. But what's interesting is that we actually look at that movement of data between the primary Dell EMC and the secondary EMC. So you've got that active, passive data center setup, maybe you've got active. We would actually, because we're orchestrating that, we can actually see the flow of that. And what's more important is now, what with GDPR, we can actually tag all the backups and all the replicas within inside your environment. So although that's happening and being driven through the Dell EMC stack within inside your estate across multiple data centers, within inside the Veeam Availability Platform, we'll actually show you that data went from data center A to data center B, whether it be a backup, whether it be a replica, whether it was written to tape or saved down to the data domain box, will actually show you that and allow you to generate a report. So from a compliance perspective, if you were quizzed as to where that data has gone, maybe one of your data centers is outside of the EU, so again, citing Article 44, you can actually show that in that report. So driving it all through the Veeam Availability Platform gives you that additional layer of visibility, okay? And what's more important is if you want to do that snapshot orchestration and actually go and inspect the snapshots from the peer end, you can actually go and do that from that secondary data center, the actual data center that's cold, not doing any I/O. The hypervisors are sitting there chilling out. So you're actually utilizing those particular storage architectures at that peer end to actually do all that cool stuff that I've showed you already. So here we go. This is actually where we're looking at a Dell EMC. It's created its native snapshots on the box. Maybe they're scheduled to do that every 15 minutes, every 10 minutes, whatever it is. Obviously, the storage administrator would set that up in agreement with the application teams to say, what sort of RPO do you want, recovery point objective, what sort of RPO do you want on that particular application? So you might find some applications have very aggressive RPOs and some maybe not so aggressive, maybe every 12 hours, maybe every day, who knows. But what you get is something like this. Now, at either end, you can see these lighter green boxes. This is where a traditional backup has been taken, where we've actually absorbed data from the Dell EMC, we've copied it out of that storage architecture and saved it down onto another storage platform, or maybe some tape media, okay? And that's happening at 8 p.m. every day. So it's happening every 24 hours. But in between those times, we're actually creating snap-only points on the Dell EMC array. So these are native snapshots based on a scheduled process, just happens automatically, set up by the storage teams. But the crucial thing here is that with the Veeam software, you can actually go and inspect those and actually leverage them to actually capture or restore data and have a play around. So let's go and see how that actually looks. In my demo lab, I'm going to go back here to this particular volume that I've got loaded up. And if we click on that, we can see an interesting thing. So we've got this. If you look at the times of these, they're actually all at a very similar time. You can see it's 0421, 0422. It looks as though this is a regular schedule, 500 gig volume, okay, and there's 8 VMs within inside it. Now what's happening is these particular time-stamped storage snapshots on the Dell EMC are happening just automatically in the background, okay? And these ones here are manual ones, and I can just create them on the fly as well myself. So I'm actually telling the Dell EMC to create a unique snapshot on that storage architecture. This is not a backup. This is actually, I'm just telling test snap George, put a label in there, and that's, oh, excuse me, I've used invalid characters. Let's just do test George. And it's going to tell the storage architecture now to create a snapshot on the Dell EMC. That's completely automatic. I don't have to log into the array. I don't have to do anything like that. So you can see now that will poke up in that particular list as a new snapshot somewhere in this library. It's probably going to be towards the top, yeah, at the top, because it's more fresher copy of that data. And you can see that's outside of those native snapshots. But what's important is we can actually right click on those and say open. So we're actually able to open those storage snapshots using the Veeam software and actually go and pluck out data from them and actually inspect all of the data that lives within inside those particular libraries or volumes. So I'm actually just going to do that one now. I'm going to do a file restore, and it's actually going to load up the Windows Explorer, the Veeam Explorer again, and I'm just going to nurse through this particular test for webinar, and I'm going to say next, and it's going to say I'm going to launch up that particular snapshot of the SQL-DB2 snapshot point, and I can present it to you using Explorer. Now that should take about a couple of minutes to mount that into Veeam and actually allow us to actually launch the Explorer and see what's going on. So we'll come back to that in just a moment. Let's go back to our demo, or excuse me, our presentation, and look through just the final couple of slides here. We're getting to the end, guys, today. I can see the attendance is still really high, so thank you for staying with me, guys. Really good. Just a couple of last slides to cover off before we go back to that demo. I mentioned earlier about the GDPR piece. Obviously, we track and tag data. That's all driven through Veeam ONE, our monitoring solution. And Veeam ONE really takes a much more trending and capacity planning approach to monitoring. So we look at the the trends and the behavior of your environment, the resources within inside it. And I always use the analogy of that, we don't necessarily have to set thresholds. A lot of monitoring packages utilize thresholds where they might say, let me know when a data store or a particular resource reaches 95%. And then you get an email and it says, this is at 95%, and you have to actively do something about it. So it's reactive. Now with us, we actually look at all of those resources, all of those points within inside your estate on the virtual layer across the stack, and actually say to you, this is a particular resource. This is going to run out in 5 months. So you can appropriate budgets far more intelligently with that Veeam ONE platform. And going back to that threshold analogy, if you've got a storage volume, let's say, for example, a storage volume in your environment on the Dell EMC estate, and it's got, I don't know, 4 terabytes of data left on it, you might say, oh, 4 terabytes, that's absolutely loads. I don't need to worry about that whatsoever. But if the application is burning a terabyte a day, then obviously you've only got 4 days to actually do something until that data store has filled up and the applications become compromised. So because we look at the trending, we would actually say to you, you've got 72 odd hours or however long it is before that data center that data store has been compromised. So we'd actually tell you that in advance, even though there was more than enough of a threshold overhead on that particular volume because the application just started to log loads of data, whatever it may be. So bear that in mind. This all comes together with that capacity planning and forecasting, resource optimization within inside your environment using that Veeam ONE platform. And to summarize, just covering off that sort of marriage between Veeam and Dell EMC, lower impact backups. So I talked about that at the beginning, the ability to actually go and speak to the storage architecture, tell it to create a storage snapshot, and then we absorb that from the storage array itself, rather than having to move all that data traffic through VMware, through the VMware kernel ports, through the application, which becomes an overhead. It becomes a 10, 20% overhead on those applications. You completely mitigate that with that lower impact of backups. More recovery options, of course, as those snapshots are being created on those storage arrays at your primary data center, at your secondary data center, tertiary, so on and so forth. You can actually go and cherry pick those individual recovery points out from those storage arrays, from those Dell EMC platforms through the Veeam platform. The data labs, things like SureBackup, the ability to actually do all that testing, that application testing, not necessarily on the backup architecture, but actually on the live production snapshots that are just sitting there cold, doing absolutely nothing. Very powerful tool sets allow you to test all those applications that live within inside those virtual machines or those physical boxes that are connected into them. And of course, with Veeam ONE, far better visibility across your storage, across your virtual platform, across your backup and availability spectrum. Okay, let's just go back very quickly before I dive onto questions. And you can see here, it's actually launched Explorer for me. That was just a couple of minutes while I navigated away from that. And you can see we can actually drive into the actual file system of that VM. The VM is not live. This is just browsing the actual data that connects on it, that is within inside that storage snapshot. So getting to this stage, having to do that manually through the Dell EMC, if you've done that before, that would be a pain in the neck. So this actually mitigates all of that and gives that a Veeam Explorer to those individual users. And I can actually say, take this folder and I want to restore it, overwrite it, push it back into the live VM, okay, because it knows where it came from, or actually say copy it to. Let's copy it to my desktop and put it on a folder somewhere because I want to analyze it and do some testing on it, wherever it may be. So you've got full access to all of the drives that are connected on that particular box. You've got an E drive, an F drive, might be SQL logs in there, could be whatever it may be. So I think that explains it. And now when I click this X box, what it's going to do is unmount that connection and pack that entire snapshot back away into an immutable state. Again, immutable because it's as it was before. We've not changed any of the data within inside that. So super easy, super quick for your backup teams to manage. So we've still got really high attendance, guys. Thank you so much for staying on today. There are some questions that have come in. I saw some come in earlier on. Let's just nurseries. We've got 9 minutes left on the webinar, so do appreciate your time. Does this work on physical, the backup from storage snapshots? Does this work from a physical server and a virtual server? So I assume you mean on the Veeam drive a server. So we can scale quite nicely at Veeam. We don't have to live with inside virtual or physical. We can very flexible. We get deployed. Ultimately, our software gets deployed into Windows. So you can deploy us into a VM running Windows, or you can deploy us into a physical box running Windows. That might be in cloud or somewhere else on-prem. Who knows? Doesn't really matter. But to get the backup from storage snapshots, because we're having to interface with those fiber channel protocols, with maybe the iSCSI, whatever it is on the back end of the Dell EMC, we do need a physical connector. So it's advisable to actually put the Veeam proxy. Proxy is the terminology we use to say the thing that drives the workload. It's the service that runs the actual backup workload. Put that onto physical architecture. Okay, and we prefer more cores than higher clock rate. So more cores, a juicy amount of RAM, give us a backup server, and actually we'll go and connect out to those HBAs and absorb that data. So that is the recommendation, and you'll get a far higher throughput doing that. So I hope that answers your question there, Josh. How many proxies do I need? Very general question. Now, obviously we're flexible. Like I said before, there's no rule of thumb as to what is the right number of proxies, but we can scale so easily. So if you want to spin up maybe 3 or 4 VMs running Windows and deploy additional proxies, Veeam proxies, we will increase our throughput, okay, as we drive more backup workloads. And you can do that very, very quickly and very, very easily. I typically say to my customers, aim for about 50 to 60 VMDKs per backup proxy, okay? So that gives it the ability to capture all of those VMs. Obviously, if they're really small VMDKs, then you could probably increase that up. But obviously, you want to monitor actually what the bottleneck there is. So, yeah, in a environment of maybe 200, 300 VMs, you might have, a couple of proxies at the very least. Is it only available for iSCSI? No. So with the Dell EMC range, we match their protocols. So they support mixed protocol, so fiber channel, iSCSI, and NFS. So we actually can utilize that technology across all of those different protocols. And let me scroll down and see any of the other questions here. Why is a VMware Snap created in the graph? So yeah, I think that was the sort of like image I had up earlier with the sort of x-axis and the y-axis. And obviously, yeah, a VMware snapshot is still created when we do backup from storage snapshots. And that is because we still need to create a VMware snapshot to capture the application data that lives within inside the VMs. So if it's, say, for example, SQL, we still want to run VSS against it. So if you're logged into VMware when a backup operation is running, what you will see is the task manager at the bottom will show a snapshot. It will be there for about 5 seconds, and then it will get closed off. Okay, so the snapshot is there for a very, very short period of time, so it won't cause any interference with those applications, and then it's closed off almost immediately. Can we work with data domain? Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I covered off that about halfway through the deck. We work with data domain as a target, so I'll actually show you that in the interface. So if I go to my backup infrastructure, so yeah, my storage infrastructure. No, actually, I am lying. It's in the backup infrastructure. We would interact with the data domain as a target, not as a source for doing the backup from storage snapshots. So if I go add backup repository, within inside our wizard, we already have a pre-populated, if I select deduplicated storage appliance, we already have a pre-populated radio button for the Dell EMC data domain family. So this is where from your Dell EMC VNX or Unity stack, where it is the source, when we take those backup from storage snapshots, when we send them somewhere, we're sending them to data domain. So you're getting a really good marriage there. You're getting the benefits of actually having really high compression, high deduplication on the dedupe boxes, but we don't take the backup from storage snapshots from the data domain because that acts as a target for us. Okay, so again, the critical thing there is you can see that's all built into the software. We have a partnership with Dell Data Domain, so they've already got their logos emblazoned all into our software. You can see here that actually this guy here is an EMC box sitting there, a data domain 5510. So there was a couple other questions in there, just reading them. Some of them sound like there's a bit of an overlap there, so I hope that's covered them off. We do advocate SEs being available to the community of our end user customers. Any other questions, do feel free to contact me. And with regards to maybe some of the other assets we have, there is a ton of material available on the Veeam.com website. So, if you Google search Veeam.com or Veeam EMC Storage Availability, then it will come up with a number of PDFs and a ton of assets, best practice, white papers, all of that good stuff. And actually, just looking at one of the other questions, someone has asked, is this webinar recorded? It certainly will be. So it will also be published onto the Veeam.com website at some point in the next week or so. So it's been an early start, guys. Thank you so much for staying with me. I can see we've had really high attendance, and the events team will be really pleased about that. So that's absolutely fantastic. I very much appreciate your time, and have a lovely day and the rest of your week. Take care. Bye-bye.